A gleaming white bullet train barrels out of Tokyo precisely on time. Half a world away, an American Amtrak train lurches out of a station, already running late. In Japan, JR East alone whisks 17 million people every day, with no taxpayer subsidy, and even a 20-second early departure sparks an official apology. But in the US, all of Amtrak carries roughly 34 million passengers in a year and still loses money. How did Japan build a profitable rail network that moves a third of the world's train riders, while America's passenger rail struggles to even break even? The answer lies in a fundamental choice. The US actually has a highly profitable rail system, but it's built for cargo, not people. Today, we dive into the story of two systems with opposite goals, one moving commuters, the other moving containers, and what it means for the future. In 2017, Japanese trains carried nearly 30% of all rail passengers in the world. Japan's three major rail companies, JR East, Central West, operate without government subsidies, generating billions in profit from passengers and station businesses. The country's rail network is famed for punctuality. Delays are measured in seconds, and annual ridership is in the billions. In contrast to this efficiency, the entire Amtrak system hit a record 34.5 million trips in fiscal year 2025, about what 2 days of rides on Japan's railways deliver. Despite approximately $3.9 billion in revenue that year, Amtrak still ran a $598 million operating loss. U.S. passenger rail has historically relied on annual federal grants, approximately $2 billion per year for operations, though a massive one-time capital injection in 2021 helped address maintenance backlogs. However, the system still loses money on daily operations and often shares tracks with freight trains, causing chronic delays. As of 2020, pressure is mounting to improve rail. Record ridership on Amtrak shows demand is there, while soaring fuel costs and climate concerns make efficient mass transit crucial. Yet new projects like a Texas high-speed line face legal roadblocks and funding woes. Understanding Japan's playbook and why the US hasn't replicated it is key to any future rail renaissance. Simply put, if America could run trains like Japan does, it could transform transportation. So what's stopping it? By the 1980s, Japanese National Railways, JNR, was a broken system. Competition from cars and planes had eroded JNR's market share from 45% in 1965 to just 23% by 1985. The once proud railway was drowning in red ink. Annual losses hit 1 trillion yen by 1980, and the government was paying 600 billion yen in subsidies in 1985 just to keep it afloat. JNR's debt had skyrocketed with years of heavy investments and political meddling in unprofitable lines. By 1987, JNR carried a staggering 37 trillion yen, about $300 billion, in debt, and had utterly lost the public's confidence. Something had to change. In April 1987, Japan took the dramatic step of breaking up JNR. Technically, this was corporatization rather than instant privatization. The government split the National Railroad into 7 new companies, still state-owned at first, but structured to operate like private businesses. Crucially, the reformers didn't just spin off companies, they restructured the entire financial foundation. Of JNR's enormous debt, only a portion was given to the new companies. About 11.6 trillion yen was allocated to the strongest JRs, East, Central, West, and related entities in amounts deemed manageable. The remaining 25.5 trillion yen, roughly 70% of the debt, was shunted to a new JNR settlement corporation, tasked with liquidating assets to pay it down. In other words, Japan's government took the debt bullet so the newborn rail companies could start with cleaner balance sheets. Even so, taxpayers eventually had to absorb around 14 to 24 trillion yen of JNR's liabilities that asset sales couldn't cover. It was a steep price, but reformers argued it was worth it to save the rail system. Perhaps most importantly, the JR companies were given commercial freedom that JNR never had. No longer strictly a government service, they could set their own fares, manage staffing without political interference, and branch into new businesses. This was critical. Under JNR, running trains was a public duty rather than a profit-driven enterprise, and ventures outside pure rail operations were limited. After 1987, however, the JRs could integrate vertically, running not just trains, but station retail, real estate, hotels, travel agencies, and more in order to boost revenue. The idea was to emulate Japan's private railway companies, which for decades had profited by developing shopping centers and suburbs along their lines. Now the JR firms could do the same. The turnaround was evident within a few years. The newly incentivized JR companies slashed costs and improved service, and passengers responded. By 1993, the number of passengers carried was 20% higher than in 1986, the last year of JNR. After decades of decline, ridership rebounded sharply, and even freight traffic, which had been plummeting, ticked up by approximately 20% in ton-kilometers over the same period. Productivity soared as well. With less than half the workforce JNR had, the JR companies were running more trains and carrying more people, causing employee productivity to jump dramatically. Importantly for the public, fares stabilized. In the 10 years after privatization, there was only one modest fare increase on the main island lines versus nearly annual fare hikes in JNR's final years. Customers enjoyed better on-time performance, cleaner trains, and a newfound customer-first attitude from rail management. The toxic labor strikes and neglect of the JNR era faded, replaced by a focus on efficiency and service, regaining public trust by ending politically driven money losers and focusing on riders' needs. The core JR companies, East, Central, and West, soon became profitable enterprises, earning healthy operating profits on their rail services and growing new income streams by the mid-1990s. By the early 2000s, JR East and JR West were fully privatized with their stock traded on the market, and JR Central followed soon after. For example, JR East, the largest passenger company, now has $26 billion in annual revenue and does not receive government subsidies at all. In fact, JR East, JR Central, and JR West have paid dividends to private shareholders in recent years, a far cry from the massive losses under JNR. While not every JR is rosy, the smaller JR Hokkaido and others still require some support. They represent a small fraction of ridership. A pivotal factor in Japan's rail profitability is how the JR companies leveraged real estate and commercial development. The logic is simple. A train station isn't just a transport stop. It's valuable real estate with captive foot traffic, so the Japanese mastered this value capture model to profit from it. JR East, for example, owns 2,000-plus retail stores, from department stores to convenience shops, and 162 shopping centers located in or around its stations, plus dozens of office buildings and hotels. These businesses are highly profitable and reinforce the rail operations because every day 17 million passengers ride JR East's trains. That's 17 million potential customers passing by the station kiosks, malls, and restaurants. By keeping people in the station environment, JR East boosts its non-fare sales. In 2018, one-third of JR East's revenue came from non-transportation business, up from 25% in the mid-1990s. In other words, 1 out of every $3 JR East earns is from things other than train tickets, which greatly buffers the company's finances. Take Shinjuku Station in Tokyo, the world's busiest transit hub, where about 770,000 people use JR East trains each day. JR East is actively developing massive projects on site, such as a 600,000 square foot office tower and multiple large shopping complexes right above the station. The goal is to ensure riders do more than ride. They shop, dine, maybe even live or work near the station, generating rental income and retail sales for the railway. This integration of town building with railroads creates a virtuous cycle where better stations attract more passengers, boosting retail revenue that funds better service. Even during privatization, Japan used real estate shrewdly. JNR's liquidation body sold off prime land like old rail yards in central cities for redevelopment, raising 7.7 trillion yen to help pay down that huge debt. This not only aided the balance sheet, but transformed city landscapes, such as the site of Tokyo's old Shiodome rail yard becoming a district of skyscrapers, serving as an early example of monetizing rail assets beyond just running trains. Japan's rail success isn't only structural, it's also cultural. A hallmark example is the Shisa Kanko, or pointing and calling safety method. If you've ever been in Japan, you've seen train conductors and platform staff physically point at signals or gauges and call out status, all clear. This might look strange, but it's proven to reduce operational errors by up to 85%. Developed over a century ago, this rigorous approach to safety and procedure ensures mistakes are caught before they cause delays or accidents. It's emblematic of how Japanese railways stress precision, from the human factors to maintenance, to achieve world-beating reliability, with the Shinkansen famously averaging delays under a minute per year. While Japan was fixing its rails in the late 20th century, the United States was plowing full steam ahead on highways and air travel. By 1971, America's private passenger trains were as good as dead, unprofitable, and largely abandoned by the rail companies. In response, Congress created Amtrak that year as a quasi-public national rail carrier, basically to prevent passenger rail from going extinct. Amtrak inherited skeletal service on a patchwork of routes and has been trying to make it work ever since. More than 50 years on, the result has been persistent dysfunction and financial struggle. Unlike the JR companies of Japan, Amtrak was never truly privatized nor properly nationalized. It sits in an awkward middle as a for-profit corporation owned by the federal government. It is expected to run like a business, but is mandated to serve nationwide public interest routes that are unprofitable. Amtrak relies on Congress for funding each year, which means its fate is at the mercy of politics. While the 2021 infrastructure law provided a historic $66 billion injection for capital upgrades, Amtrak still fights annually for its operating budget. These funds often barely cover maintenance and operating losses, leaving little room for true expansion. Amtrak has never had a profitable year in its half-century of existence. It earns revenue from ticket sales, about $2.7 billion in ticket revenue in fiscal year 2025, plus food service, but expenses exceed this. In a strong year like fiscal year 2019, Amtrak posted record ridership of roughly 32 million and came close to operational break-even before depreciation. But including all costs, it still lost money. Fast forward to FY 2025, Amtrak announced a record 34.5 million trips and $3.9 billion in revenue, yet still had a $598 million adjusted operating loss. The Northeast Corridor, Boston to New York to Washington, usually makes an operating profit, but those gains are wiped out by losses on long-distance routes and smaller corridors. Every year, Congress effectively subsidizes Amtrak's losses to keep the trains running. This subsidy dependence is the polar opposite of Japan's model, where rail companies pay dividends rather than consume taxpayer dollars. Several structural roadblocks differentiate the US case, starting with network obligations. By law, Amtrak must operate a national network, including long-distance trains to far-flung towns, a political requirement to get support from many states. Routes like the California Zephyr or the Sunset Limited are spectacular journeys, but carry relatively few passengers over huge distances and almost always lose money. In Japan, by contrast, unprofitable rural lines were pruned or handed off to local governments after privatization. Amtrak, due to its nation-spanning mandate, has to stretch resources over 21,000 miles of routes, some very busy, some nearly empty, which is a recipe for inefficiency. A critical difference is freight railroad dominance. It is important to understand that US freight railroads are actually the envy of the world. They are massive, profitable, and highly efficient at moving goods. But this efficiency comes at the cost of passenger speed. In the US, freight railroads own most of the tracks that Amtrak uses outside the Northeast, meaning passenger trains are guests on a system built for cargo. Furthermore, Japan has a physical hard lock that prevents this conflict. The high-speed Shinkansen runs on standard gauge tracks, while Japanese freight trains run on older, narrow-gauge lines. They literally cannot mix. In the US, the tracks are identical, allowing freight delays to bleed directly into passenger service. Infrastructure mismatch also forces Amtrak to maintain very low speeds on many routes. You can't run a 150 miles per hour bullet train on winding 19th century alignments occupied by heavy freight. Even on the Northeast Corridor, where Amtrak owns the tracks, the infrastructure is old and underfunded, limiting average speeds. Furthermore, American regulations historically made it difficult to adopt advanced rail technology, demanding heavier train designs for crash safety that effectively barred the lighter high-speed train sets used in Japan or Europe. While this has started to change, coupled with lengthy environmental review processes for any new rail line, a proposed rail project can die a slow death in paperwork and legal challenges before a single shovel hits the ground. To see the struggle up close, look at the Texas Central Railway project. This private venture was announced in 2013 with great fanfare. A 240-mile high-speed line linking Dallas and Houston in 90 minutes, using Japanese Shinkansen technology. On paper, Texas is an ideal place for bullet trains. The distance is perfect, the cities are huge, and the corridor is flat. And Japan's JR Central even partnered on the plan. Yet a decade later, not a single mile of track has been laid. The project has been stalled by a barrage of challenges, primarily a massive cost explosion. Initial estimates pegged the cost around $10 billion, but as details emerged, the price tag ballooned to over $30 billion by 2020. Unlike Japan's Shinkansen, which had government backing, Texas Central was barred by law from using state funds. The company planned to finance via loans and private equity, but lenders balked as the costs soared and risks mounted. By 2022, the CEO resigned, and the company all but halted operations. Beyond funding, the project faced deep skepticism regarding its viability. While Texas Central projected around 5 to 6 million passengers yearly, independent analyses suggested maybe only 1.4 million riders would materialize by the mid-2020s. Simultaneously, the developer faced fierce landowner opposition. Unlike in Japan, where railways often use viaducts over farmland, Texas Central planned to use large earthen berms to seal the corridor. While safer, these berms create a physical wall across properties, leading Texas ranchers to fight tooth and nail against granting the private company eminent domain. Although the Texas Supreme Court ultimately affirmed the railroad's right to acquire land, the project ultimately stalled on the battlefield of finance. As interest rates rose in 2020, the cost of private capital skyrocketed. Investors simply didn't believe the projected ridership numbers would generate enough profit to repay the massive $30 billion construction debt. Unlike Japan, where the government backed the initial Shinkansen risks, Texas Central tried to go it alone in the private market, and the market said no. Texas is not alone in these struggles. California's state-led high-speed rail project from LA to San Francisco has suffered similar delays and cost overruns, now projected at over $100 billion, with only a partial segment likely by 2030. In contrast, private ventures like Brightline in Florida have found some success by operating medium-speed trains on existing tracks and funding themselves partly through real estate, a hybrid model closer to the Japanese approach. Meanwhile, on the Northeast Corridor, Amtrak's new Acela trains finally started service in late 2025, promising slightly faster trips, but they remain limited by fundamental infrastructure constraints, like century-old tunnels and track curvature. Up to now, attempts to transplant Japan's profitable model to America have faltered. No American passenger rail company has managed to operate without subsidies, let alone thrive through real estate. While Amtrak has started renting out space at key stations like New York Penn, it pales in comparison to JR East's empire. The challenges in the US, longer distances, a car-centric culture, fragmented governance, and the lack of a national rail vision, have so far prevented the kind of holistic, self-sustaining rail system Japan enjoys. However, the stark contrast is now clearer than ever, and it raises the big question: is the divergence due to geography and culture, or due to choices and policies that can change? At this point, it's easy to say, well, Japan is Japan and America is America, different worlds. Certainly, cultural attitudes and structural factors play a huge role in rail's fate. But many commonly cited differences turn out to be less decisive than they seem. Let's unpack a few, from the safety culture to urban planning and operational philosophy, and also tackle the big counter-arguments like geography and population density. 1. Operational culture. Precision versus good enough. Japan's rail operators foster a culture of almost obsessive precision and customer service. We saw this with the Shisakanko system reducing errors. Another famous anecdote. In 2017, a train in Japan left 20 seconds early, and the company issued a public apology for the inconvenience caused. In the US, if a train is 20 minutes early, rare as that is, it's cause for celebration. And if it's 20 minutes late, it's considered on time by Amtrak's accounting on certain routes. The expectations are just completely different. Japanese crews are trained to take ownership of punctuality and safety. Station staff bow to apologize if a delay occurs. This ethos boosts performance because everyone, top to bottom, is aligned to deliver reliable service. In the US, the corporate culture around Amtrak or commuter rail is not nearly as ingrained with strict rituals or accountability. It's not that American rail workers don't work hard, they do, but the systemic pursuit of excellence is less visible. When no one expects the train to be on time to the second, mediocrity can become acceptable. Culture isn't everything, but it greases the wheels. Japan's rail culture builds public trust, thus more ridership, whereas Amtrak's struggles with on-time performance can further alienate potential riders. 2. Urban planning and land use. One obvious reason often given. Japan is dense and transit-friendly. The US is sprawling and car-dependent. There's truth here. Japanese cities are built around rail hubs, with extensive local transit feeding the main lines. But look at Los Angeles. We often assume it grew around freeways, but that's a myth. LA actually expanded on the back of the Pacific Electric red cars, once the world's largest electric rail network, before ripping them out in the mid-20th century. The difference isn't that LA couldn't do rail, it's that they chose to dismantle it. This means the habits of the population differ today. A Japanese commuter likely lives within walking distance of a station. An American in a suburb might not even have a train station within 20 miles. However, let's challenge the blanket idea that America is too low density for rail. In reality, the US population is highly concentrated in several mega-regions. For example, the Northeast megalopolis, Boston to New York to Washington corridor, has about 50 million people packed into a narrow strip, roughly 360 people per square kilometer. While this doesn't match the extreme density of Japan's Tokyo-Osaka corridor, it is actually triple the density of France or Spain, approximately 100 per square kilometer, both of which built extensive high-speed rail networks. This suggests density is not an insurmountable barrier. It's about where the density is and providing good service there. What about geography? Another claim. The US is huge, and cities are farther apart. True, cross-country trips in the US are longer than in Japan, but not every city pair needs a train. The Northeast Corridor is about 450 miles end-to-end, similar to Japan's main Tokaido Shinkansen route. Tokyo-Osaka is approximately 320 miles, Tokyo to Fukuoka approximately 670 miles. California's major cities are a few hundred miles apart, similar to Japan's. In the Midwest, Chicago sits 300 to 400 miles from cities like Minneapolis, St. Louis, Detroit, all within what is considered viable high-speed rail range. So the distance argument mainly applies to cross-country travel, where even Japan wouldn't take a train if it were that large. They'd fly too. For intermediate corridors, geography is not destiny. The difference is that Japan connected its dense city pairs with trains, while the US often hasn't. 3. Political will and philosophy. This might be the biggest factor. Japan's government made rail a national priority, not only to privatize it in 1987, but to continually expand and improve it. The Shinkansen network kept growing, northward to Hokkaido, westward to Kyushu, with government support. Even private rail companies in cities often coordinate closely with government on land use and transit-oriented development. In the US, by contrast, passenger rail has often been an afterthought or a political football. There's a philosophical resistance in America to subsidizing rail or treating it as essential infrastructure. As one commentator cynically noted, Americans are propagandized to view business as the best way to run anything and to expect public services to turn a profit. This mindset meant that when Amtrak needed funding, critics would say, "Why fund a money-losing train?" A framing rarely applied to highways or airports, which are understood to need public investment. The result is a starvation cycle. Amtrak never gets enough capital to truly improve, so it remains mediocre, which then is used to justify not funding it, a self-fulfilling prophecy of dysfunction. Conversely, Japan treated its railways, even after privatization, as something worth investing in for the public good. The early years after 1987 proved that an infusion of funding, debt relief, etc., and freedom could unleash a rail company's potential. And once the JR companies proved profitable, it vindicated the policy. In the US, no equivalent grand strategy for passenger rail has been consistently pursued at the federal level. There are flickers. For example, the recent Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, 2021, included significant funds for Amtrak and new corridors, showing a possible shift in will. But historically, the vision wasn't there.